Happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome to the family meeting and welcome to the substitute teacher. We're going to have a good time today. Let me know in the chat if you're watching. I already see Tramaris there and Victoria. And Victoria is about to have a very happy event in her life. Super excited about that. Let me know if you are watching. Monique is on her way to speak in another state. She's on a plane right now. And so if you are going to said event, I guess it's public, so I guess I could say it. She's going to be speaking in Detroit at a women's conference. They said they're expecting about 700 people, so that's cool. And so if you live in the Detroit area, maybe you can go check it out. You can find out all the information on our website. And yes, I am the substitute teacher again. And I've got a great dialogue partner, though. Today we're going to have an awesome conversation. I'm super excited to introduce a friend to you that you haven't met before. And Victoria says, you aren't the substitute. Oh, I know how you people are. You really love it when Monique's on here. And Kevin to talk about geopolitical whatnot. But Kevin is going to marry, I don't know, somebody. He's going to a wedding, and I didn't even know Kevin knows how to marry people, but apparently he's one of these pastoral people. So he's off to do that. So, all right. We are going to talk about two topics today, at least, probably more. And as you guys know, family meeting is sort of an informal conversation, less planned and sometimes experimental. And so today we're going to be talking about more about Andrew Tate. We covered him a few weeks ago on the All the Things show. We had a little discussion about him with our friend Dr. Owen Strahan, and that was a good conversation. And then I think some thoughts on the family meeting, or it could have been on my podcast, I don't remember, about Tate a couple of weeks ago. So continuing this, because he's really just, his platforming is increasing, and so I want to continue to have these conversations to make sure that you are equipped and have some things and are informed, have some things to say about it. So we're going to talk about Andrew Tate a bit more, and then we're going to talk about Tim Keller, which is not a topic we have ever really covered in all of these years of the ministry. We've had many inquiries about Tim Keller, haven't really had a good dialogue partner to talk to about it, and have a friend who has some thoughts. And so I'm going to look forward to that conversation today. So I'm going to be talking to my friend George Sayour. And George is in my Doctor of Ministry cohort. That's how we met at Birmingham Theological Seminary. He is a pastor back east. And I always appreciated hearing his comments in our classes. I have found him to be a very thoughtful voice and just extremely informed and nuanced. And I've been wanting to have him on a podcast for a while now. So he's agreed to kind of jump on with me here at the last minute, and I am looking forward to talking to him. So let me get him on here. Welcome, George.
Thank you, Krista. It's awesome to be on. I'm very intimidated. You have some very intelligent, and engaged listeners, and so we'll see where this goes. I was very last minute, and so I am not prepared for this whatsoever. But
we're just going to freestyle.
Very cool.
That's the nature of the family meeting, is that it is a very informal, often unscripted conversation, and we just jump on here and talk. So let's talk about Andrew Tate first. And you had made a tweet, and I should have found it back, but I didn't. But you had made a tweet some time ago that got my attention about Tate. And so I want to talk about that from a pastoral perspective and what you're seeing. But first, for anyone who doesn't know who Andrew Tate is, how would you describe him to someone who's not on X? Who is Andrew Tate?
Tate is despicable. He's, but he's a social media influencer. I've only become acquainted with him in the last less than a year.
Same.
He's very misogynistic, but he's attracted a following of younger men because of his motivational sort of energy and speeches and advice around things like physical fitness, but also around personal empowerment. And he's really tapped into the whole be a man ethos that is attracting young men, because young men are just, I mean, they're beaten down all over society. So
yeah, he's is it worth mentioning he's a Muslim convert?
yes, yeah, I guess so. He's and that's new, I think. And I mean, he's facing charges for sex trafficking and abuse, and I mean, there's all kinds of but I don't know what to believe and what not to believe.
Yeah.
He was also I think an MMA fighter. I think that's where he got his some of his fame and early money.
Yeah, he's kind of he has this these classes that young men can take. They're called PhD, and I don't know what all the acronyms stand for, but H stands for a certain garden tool. And he's teaching young men how to get women, but the way that he tells them how to get women is through extreme promiscuity, but not monogamy. I'm trying to, just in case people have children listening, I'm trying to be a little diplomatic here, but
I'm glad you just said that, because I wouldn't have. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. So it's extreme promiscuity, to the point that I've seen tweets where he says, even men should consider their wives to be a person who we might say is a person who has a very ancient profession.
Oh.
And with men, and that even wives ought to be considered that way by their husbands, because the husband is paying for them with food and housing, and so all intimacy is based on a transactional relationship. And a lot of his work too is started as webcamming with women, and that's how he made a lot of his money, was through webcamming. Now, George, have you seen these horrible videos? I'm not going to play one, but have you seen the horrible videos on X of him beating women, choking women, and all of that?
No. And I'm glad you're not going to. I don't feel the need to watch it. I've seen like montages that like Megan Basham either put together or found. I don't know. My impression is those are early, like 10 years ago, early Tate. And I think that's what gets lost in the conversation is he's tried to clean up the act. Like even the PhD thing you mentioned.
Yeah.
Like now when you go to his, this academy website, it's the real world. And he's got a link for philosophy and education and act now. And it's much more, it's cleaned up, but the internet has a long memory. But even recently he said, stupid things. And I've showed young men this, like not worse than stupid. I mean, I don't want to downplay it. Horrible things, like basically it came out when Elon Musk, something came out that he has another child, recently.
Yeah.
I mean, the child's not recent, but it just came out recently, and
right.
People are attacking him for having another child with another woman. And Tate jumped all over this and talked about, if you're a true conqueror, you have, children with multiple women.
Only wimps have children with one woman.
That's right. Yeah. Right. And so, it's all still there.
Yeah. So from and I think what's worth mentioning too is that I think that this I'm seeing like kind of a divide within conservative commentators, You know, you have people like Candace Owens, and this week Patrick Bet-David, Benny Johnson a few weeks ago, platforming Tate in a very positive way. And then you have other people like Joel Berry from the Babylon Bee, and like you said at the beginning, like Tate's vile. Like he needs to be a mark and avoid kind of person. And there's this definitely a growing divide within conservative commentators about that. What are your thoughts about that? Or do you have
Yeah,
any? To
yeah,
me,
no, I do.
it's like a total layup to say he's a
That,
misogynist. He's someone to be avoided, but people are acting like this is
right.
some weird take.
Right, right. But like, I think why one of the reasons, like the tweet you mentioned about me, is because, I was attacked mercilessly on X for my little account. People were saying I was defending Tate. I wasn't defending Tate. I I was very clear I wasn't defending Tate, but I'm upset with Christians who want to marginalize Christian young men who are following Tate without trying to understand why they're following him. And so that's what but I've never defended Tate. It should be a layup. Honestly, I think a lot of these people didn't know Tate's the despicable stuff. I think they probably just heard he's a misogynist, and they see him working out with weights and saying misogynistic things, like, okay, but when you start seeing like the abusive things that he said and the um downright wicked things that he said, like, I don't know how you can how anybody can defend that. But again, he cleaned up his demeanor, relatively speaking, the last number of years, and that's what's attracted these young men. So
Well, let's get into that. Is from your perspective, um, on from your perspective, what are you seeing as a pastor? What is why did you I'm trying to find the tweet. I can't find it, but kind of just tell us like what was your tweet, and
right,
what are your thoughts
right.
about it?
So yeah, again, because we just decided to do this last minute. So Nancy Piercy,
Yeah.
you're familiar with her, right? And I think
Yeah.
she did a book researching about men, and um, she tweeted about she was at a Christian school.
Oh, I have that tweet. I can show that.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
so
I
that
have
that's
that.
what caused this whole nightmare, right?
So her tweet was, a former graduate student of mine now teaches at a high school, and she sent me an email saying all my male students are fans of Andrew Tate. They've even been including quotes from Andrew Tate in the yearbook. I asked, "Where do you teach?" She said, "At a classical Christian school." Even Christian young men are being drawn in by these online influencers if we do not offer them a healthy, attractive biblical model of masculinity.
Yeah. So James White, the James White, and he's been a big influence on my own life, and I have a lot of respect for him. But he takes issue with her tweet because he says he's frustrated with these calls for good examples of biblical masculinity in the church, and you know there's plenty of great examples in the church, and he's just sick of hearing about it. And young men just need to be told to um, suck it up, be good husbands, be good fathers, go to work hard, and that's what you're supposed to do. And I took issue with it. And part of why I was attacked was because, and I honestly didn't mean this as an ad hominem. I mean, I'm 50 years old. I remember when boomer was not uh, a slur. I remember when you were just talking about people from that generation or the mindset of the generation. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
hearing that in the 1980s. So I said, this kind of boomer mindset is what got us into this mess to begin with. And people just went off and they said, well, you're defending Tate and whatever. And I said more, but my point is there's more to being a man than being a good husband, father, and responsible employee. And if that's what we keep telling young men, it's like, and why I said that's like the boomer way of, because that generation was basically do what's right. That's what they would tell people,
Mm.
suck it up and do what's right. And it's like, okay, yeah, that great. That's not working. And I mean, I'm a pastor, and me from our class. I don't mince words about what the word of God says. I stick with the word. I show the word. I tell you the word. But when I'm talking to, I want to understand what is the attraction. And White's assumption was they are following Tate because of total depravity, and they're following their baser instincts. And I said, well, you've obviously, I mean, yeah, there are men following Tate because they like that he's a vile person regarding women, but that's not why these kids in this Christian school are following him. These kids were, little children when he was saying the vile stuff. And now what they're hearing from him is all this motivational stuff at a time when
Mm.
every bit of, any masculine urge is viewed as toxic. And there's not great examples within churches. A lot of the men in churches look like they're just beaten down and they're doing what they're supposed to do. It's often not an attractive life for a young kid who wants to explore and be strong and trying to figure out what it means to be a man as opposed to a woman, because everybody's telling young boys to be just like the girls, and to have the same demeanor and everything. And I told White, the Bible. So White told me, he said, well, you need to Bible more. And he goes, because Paul, obviously the Apostle Paul, missed the memo. And he quoted about being, sober-minded. And of course, the Bible has a lot to say about being a man. It starts in Genesis 1 and 2. It starts with the Imago Dei, and all throughout the scriptures, there's plenty of places we can go that talk about a way to be a man that has more to do, that is more than just the roles. So in Job, twice God tells Job to dress for action like a man. Why is he saying that? And Paul uses that in Corinthians. He says, play the man. Why is Joshua told to be strong and courageous? Obviously, that's applied to women and men. I'm not saying these things aren't, but if we're going to just reduce masculinity down to being responsible and doing your roles, yeah, now I know why we're losing these young men. And I've actually spoken to them, and many of them didn't know about Tate's
Mm.
vulgarity. I mean, they knew about the language, but like if you go look at motivational messages that Tate has spoken, you just go on Spotify, iTunes, whatever. There's montages of them. He says things like, your mindset determines the chart of your life. So don't say, he goes, think about what you say. Don't say, oh, I have to go to work. Say, thank God I have a job. I get to go to work. He said, don't say I have to pick up the kids. Say, I get to go pick up my kids. And again, this is corny and cheesy, but that's speaking to a group of young men. He's telling them to care about their bodies and to exercise. And God gave us bodies, and we should care about our bodies. Those are the impulses, that the ones that I've spoken to. And then what I do is I show them the video clips. I said, okay, now listen, I get it. Okay. You like the motivational aspect of being all you can be and all that. Now let's watch this. And I have to almost throw up listening to him talk about what he wants to do to women and with women and how he treats women. And I look at the young man and I say, you have a sister. You want him speaking about your sister like this? Or how about your mother? Or how about the woman you're going to marry? Like, what's the excuse to, I mean, listen to this guy. And it's almost like they're too far down the rabbit. It's like we tend to make excuses for things we're invested in already when something comes out. And so that's why, like, a political candidate who you're all about, and then some scandal comes out and you brush it off because you're already, well, these guys are already invested. And so the Academy, for instance, by the way, I'm going on a monologue, Krista. I'll just stop here and I'll let you, we can engage a little bit here.
No, it's good. And I think that what I love about what you're saying is you're recognizing that Andrew Tate and his message impacts real people. And those young men are men that you encounter as a pastor, young men in your church. And I think that that's super important, because there's a tendency that we might have when we're only on the internet, that we think, well, how many people are really being impacted by this? But the first thing we have to know is that this is revealing something in that's impacting real people. And I guess what comes to me is I'm wondering, why are young men drawn to this? Is it because they don't, in your experience, is it because they don't have fathers? Is it because there's some lack there? Or is this just normal guy behavior of wanting to have a hero and somebody to look up to?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a great question. I think it's all of that. I think, and it's not that they don't have fathers. I mean, some of them, obviously, some of them don't.
Okay.
But I do think, like, if they're not getting affirmation from their fathers, or their fathers are not, you know, discipling them, loving them, encouraging them the way they're supposed to, they're going to, everybody's going to, young ladies are going to do that too. They're going to look for that kind of affirmation somewhere else. I just think somebody here says pendulum swing, and I don't know if that's about what I'm going to say, but I do think, there's been a big movement for the last 20 years on women's empowerment, and rightly so. I mean, I have a daughter, and I want her to, I never want anybody to tell her she can't do something or be beaten down. I want her to strive for whatever the Lord has for her. But in the process, men have been left behind. And I'm not trying to say that in the therapeutic sense, but, like, in the push to get more women to go to college, well, that's what you have now. You have a lot more women in college than you do young boys, and women are excelling in school at better rates than young men. I mean, there's all kinds of statistics on this. And so, and because there's so much focus, like you said, like, these are people, and so they're individuals. They don't have necessarily a sense of, well, this is for the common good, that we're going to elevate and empower women. They're thinking, yeah, but what about me? What is my, and then what they're told is, to eradicate any immaturity they have. And of course, boys in schools there's always a maturity gap between young ladies and young men. And there's also the whole study and statistics on, how many boys are diagnosed with ADHD at disproportionate rates. And so and that's why, because there's energy. They want to run around. They want to fight, and they're told not to fight. And I don't mean like fight but like wrestle. Like, we used to wrestle when I was a kid. You wanted to wrestle, you wanted to box, you wanted to do these things, and they're told not to do any of that. And so then there's a whole movement now where there are influencers who are saying, no, these things are good. It is good. So, but I do think there's not, the other thing young men want is they want adventure. And they're not getting that in the church. I saw a comment that I thought was great. And they said, well, there is good examples in the church, but they're never going to compete with, those in the world. I don't know. There are, of course, good examples in the church. Oh, there you go. Never be seductive as influencers as Tate. When we expect much time as him coming up with edgy zingers. They do like the zingers. Whatever the phrase was about the Bugatti, I heard that one. They loved that. Like, somebody mocked him, Tate, apparently, for the color of his Bugatti, and he said, well, what color is yours? So, I mean, but I just don't think we have to check being regular people at the door because we're Christians.
Yeah. I think what's difficult about it is that there's so much that is unbiblical and vile that is wrapped up in Tate. And so when you say, look, let's understand why this guy has success and why young men are listening to him. I mean, even just having that conversation gets people thinking, like, oh, you're endorsing Tate. It's like, no, wait a minute.
Right.
We're all we're doing is we're just saying, like, let's understand why a guy has millions of followers and what is it that he's doing, and then looking at our social moment of guys are struggling. A lot of guys feel like they don't have a vision or a purpose because the culture is telling them unless you kind of act effeminate and like a girl and have all your emotions up front, then you're not a legitimate person. But I was talking to our trainer at the gym. My husband and I go do weightlifting a couple times a week together. This is my husband.
That's awesome.
Our idea of spending time together and trying to stay healthy. And so we were talking to our trainer recently, and he's our oldest daughter's age. He's 25, and we were talking about the Tate issue. And it was interesting. His thought was he's actually a Christian young man, as we found out as we've worked with him. And he said, what's hard for him about Tate is it gives him so many depressing messages about wealth. And if you're not wealthy, you won't be able to get a good wife. And he's somewhat newly married. He's really trying to do right things in his life, has a business at 25. I think has so many admirable things about him. But it's tough because he feels like Tate sends, he said, even me, even though I know these are lies about women and about wealth, it's still hard for me. It takes a toll on me emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think the message about wealth is sorry, lost my train of thought, and I was thinking you just said a lot of good things there about that. I think I do think it's unbiblical, the message of wealth that he sets, but it is biblical to work hard and to want to be the best you can be. And so
Yeah.
there's some good and bad in that message. Somebody here says, she's talking about that thing where people are defending Tate and because they're speaking truth, and when should we just say no? And I'm saying I think we should say no. And I think, but I think we engage, like, again, if you're talking to a young person about this, and if you actually care, and that was my point to James White, is if you actually care about these young men, have you spoken to them and asked them why they're following this wicked man? And he just did it again, by the way, White. So that was like a month ago or months ago,
Yeah.
right? He just did the same thing over again. I said, "Ugh, again." You know,
But you're bringing up a really good point of, that to stop and ask the question of the individual. If you find out that your son is following Andrew Tate, or your nephew, or students in your school, like, or your church, like, just ask the question, what is it that appeals to you about his message? And then having a real conversation with them rather than just overreacting and freaking out. Try to understand what's happening for them, that this is a need that is getting filled this way.
right? And we see that in our own culture for the last 10 years or so anyway, with the rise of Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and Donald Trump and maybe Doug Wilson out in Moscow. I mean, there's a different sort of spheres, these guys, but they're speaking. There's a lot of overlap. If we're a Venn diagram, there'd be a lot of
Yeah.
overlap that's attracting sort of the same thing because, society has devolved into chaos, and sometimes the voice of reason, it might seem like it's the voice of reason, but maybe it's the pendulum swing thing. And, I think part of it too is like what example is being set by Christians and maybe even their parents in their homes, where there's an energy around Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and I get that, but like, are your kids seeing you brush under the rug their flaws because you're happy about the benefits that they're bringing to the country and the
Yeah.
protections? So and kids don't understand those distinctions. I had one young man said, well, because I like my testimony, my story is I was an engineer and manager with Procter and Gamble, and in my young 20s, I had everything I ever wanted, and I lived very wickedly, and I partied hard, and I worked hard, and the Lord grabbed me by the scruff of my neck, and he changed me. He gave me new desires. He gave me a family I can't believe. And so this young man said, "Well, you've talked about your sinful past, and look at you." I said, "Yeah, because the Lord changed me and I repented. I'm not still saying those things."
Yeah.
But like they don't, we take for granted that people can process that. But I just think society in general has blurred the lines of uh, what's acceptable. And I think Christian homes are blurring those lines. Even in, like, what are your kids, not your kids, Krista, but what are kids seeing you watch on TV?
Yeah.
On all, and how you're justifying that. And you say, the same thing. Well, there's truth in this. Well, there's truth. There's themes and truth in Game of Thrones or whatever. And it's like, okay, so then now we know why kids are watching and following things that are not Christian, because that's what they're seeing in their own homes, and you're justifying
Boy,
it.
that's a powerful point. Like sometimes we don't see our own hypocrisy as parents. And I think that Victoria is making an interesting statement that I want to expand here about, that Andrew Tate speaks truth, but he's also criticized Christianity and Christians as weak. Well, I think that what he's saying with that is that the church in America, at least in the last like 15, 20 years, we're making a lot of effeminate men in the church. And that's what he's talking about. Oh man, the surveys, this is such a hard topic because, there's even surveys about research about overweight pastors. And when you get a young, vibrant guy like Tate, who's all about encouraging young men to get in shape and all of that, that's way more appealing than looking at weak pastors who are up there in the pulpit looking very out of shape and acting kind of effeminate. And that's not attractive to young men. That doesn't give them a vision for their life. And
That's
so
right.
that's what Tate means when he says Christians are weak, that we aren't principled, we don't stand up for things, we're very fearful, we fear getting criticized, we want to be liked by the culture. That's what he means when he says that they're weak. And there's aspects of that, like these are thoughtful points. Like, but he's not the only one making them. And I think that's also important, is that,
Yeah.
there are some Christian voices that are making similar points. We don't have to go to Tate for that, but he's the one that has the mass big following.
Right. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Foster. I like some of his
Yeah.
work, and it's really good. And I think there are good examples. I mean, the statistics show, like, for you, if you want your kids, and again, I don't have them to show or pull up, but I've heard it enough that I believe it to be true. It's not simply growing up in a Christian home, but it's adults that are pouring in, other adults outside of your own immediate family that are pouring into the lives of the young people in the church. And what I always, I don't know, maybe I got this from Eldridge or something 20 years ago, but the idea of affirming your children's masculinity or femininity at a very, so I was like, man, that makes sense, and this was, again, before all this gender confusion, although, not too much before, but I was like, so I've always wanted my boys to know they measure up, they can do it. I'm proud of them. They're strong, and my daughter, I have two boys and a girl. My daughter, I wanted to let her know that she was my princess, that she's beautiful, that she's intelligent, that she's exhibiting godly qualities. And, I do think that is sometimes that's not happening in homes, and
Yeah.
so they want to hear their men, from other sources. By the way, that Christianity quote, like, since I don't know how he's attacked Christianity, I do think, I mean, we are, as Christians, called to turn the other cheek. We are called to not seek the things of the world, and you know, um, we could get everything we want in the world and lose our soul. So, if he's attacking that, then guilty as charged. Like
Yeah.
our goals and the things that matter to us are not going to be the same that what matter to him. But if he's attacking what you're saying, which I do think he is, he's spot on.
That's my understanding of the tweets that I've seen from him to that effect. Okay, let's talk about Keller. So you and I had to read a book for one of our classes called Center Church, which is a Keller book, and it is basically laying out his framework. The subtitle is Doing Balanced Gospel-Centered Ministry in Your City. And it's kind of his model for church planting. Keller's written a number of books, but this is the only one I've read. But so talk to us a little bit about, because I think initially when you encountered Keller's work, from what I remember from what we discussed in class, you thought like, oh, there's a lot here. There's some good points. Like, what was your initial thoughts about Keller and what he was doing in his POV?
Well, Keller's gone to be with the Lord, and there's no question.
And he's a brother in Christ. We'll have all of the caveats. Yeah.
No, you got it. And he's from, I mean, he's from my denomination, and people are not going to be happy that I'm, taking issue with his philosophy of ministry. But I think Keller, he's an interesting guy because he goes to New York City from a country church, and
Right.
he's going to plant in the city. Then I heard he took over a church, but whatever the case was, it was small, and he was looking for ways to meet like intellectual postmoderns in, cosmopolitan areas. And he spent the majority of his career just pastoring, so everybody knows him for his books, but he didn't write his books until like the books came the last 15 years, maybe 20. I don't know, when I think it was Reason for God may have been one of the first ones, but maybe it was Ministries of Mercy. So the point is, it's not like he had this aspiration, at least early in his career, to be this writer. He was a pastor. And then he started seeing like this movement in the city to have, I don't know, a 5,000 person church in New York City, which is something. And so he started communicating ways that he was communicating the gospel in the city. And that's what I found helpful. And I think a lot of people found helpful his way of communicating and understanding and viewing the gospel. He's very intelligent.
Very intelligent. And
very well read, can remember
yes.
things that he read. Like he must have yeah. So the gospel, like his view of the gospel is captivating. It is
He's
beautiful.
an incredible communicator. And he has just a way with words. And it's not often that you see a pastor who has this academic side to him, but he can still he can kind of translate that stuff for the masses.
That's right.
And just a very unique suite of gifts that he had. And I felt like Center Church was his attempt to try to put it in writing. Like, what is the Tim Keller secret sauce for church planting and what he's been doing and his approach to ministry?
Right. So what changed for me is when he started leaving like apologetics and the gospel and started really trying to be like this cultural exegete, which in New York, maybe he did well in his context, but that's where a lot of us started having issues and diverging from him, because he took, you mentioned the third way. He took the third way, which was originally applied to the gospel, and he started putting that grid over everything. And I guess we can get into that, but it was very unhelpful.
So his vision, and Victoria's on the stream, and she says she's not familiar with Keller. And I think Keller, he was a pastor in the Presbyterian Church in America. He was very prominent. He had a big church in downtown New York. And I think that one of the things that's very appealing about Keller is that he was seen as being more biblically conservative and yet also intellectual. And as he grew older, he was kind of held up. He's co-founder of what's called the Gospel Coalition, and he was held up as kind of this ideal of the kind of pastor that other pastors should aspire to be in the public square. You want to be the intelligent, thoughtful, highly nuanced pastor who can speak to the post postmodern generation and make the gospel very appealing and attractive. So that would be my kind of in a nutshell of
Right. So he wrote the Reason for God,
Mhm.
which is it was a New York Times bestseller. I mean, that was the other thing. Like his books for a conservative evangelical who, he believes strongly in the inspiration of scripture and all that, for his books to make the New York Times bestseller list was kind of showing, giving him the clout. And while he's not like the father of missionalism or anything like that, he is the best example or the premier example of what it means to be missional. And that's like a philosophy of ministry. We all say we're missional, but it actually means something in their context.
So what did change for you about Keller? Because, and I don't want to get you into trouble,
No, I should,
but
yeah.
I thought that you had some very thoughtful comments when we were in class together about Keller and his approach, and just kind of what, as you continue to reflect on his method and his message, like what started to shift for you?
I think X or Twitter, is that ruins everything,
Mm.
because he was tweeting all this stuff, and it was horrible theology. It was pithy, it was quaint, but it wasn't true. And what I would find is, I mean, it's true if enough nuance and presupposition is built into what he said, but it can't stand alone as its own. Additionally, like he sparked a whole movement. So there's, a lot of people say things like, well, Keller's not the problem. It's all his followers, because there's all these Kellerites running around trying to be Keller, and they're not doing it nearly as carefully as he's done it. But substantively, some of the issues I have. So he people are going to take issue when I say this, and he in no way believes, like, he understands the depth of the issue of sin, but in some ways he would soft pedal it, and this is what I mean. So this is how I'll say. So he was on, I don't know, on some panel or in some interview on a stage, and they asked him what the problem with homosexuality was, and he couldn't answer it, and he finally just said, well, it's not God's best for you. And so what we were told all along was this winsome, nuanced, intellectually captivating and interested way about being missional is to gain a hearing, because you're not going to be listened to unless you have earned the right to gain a hearing. And so here, but then when you do, you give the people the truth. And what I was finding is, now, again, I'm sure maybe in his church it was happening, although I don't know if you've seen Kirsten Powers' write-ups on this and stuff.
Yeah.
She never felt like it did happen. But here you're being asked a direct question. And let me tell you something. This really gets me. And so we are Christians, and Christians are a people of the book. We're a people of the Logos. We believe in truth. Jesus Christ is the truth. In God, there is no confusion. And so if you are asked a clear question, you don't so nuance it away so that it no longer has really any relevance or meaning. And the issue in that question is, no, that's not the issue with homosexuality. And again, I don't know who your audience is or whatever, but it's not simply not God's best for you. Okay. It is rebellion against a holy God. And I'm not talking about the unbidden, unwanted urges, which are sin, and we are compassionate with people for that. But that, and then another example of that, which from Center Church you'll see, is he stopped using, and he admits he stopped using the word sin, and he started using the word idolatry. And he said, because modern people don't like the word sin. I'm paraphrasing, but they get the idea of idolatry. And Keller's thing is you're placing something in the place of God. Now, this is hugely problematic for me as a pastor because sin and idolatry are not synonyms for each other. Idolatry is sin, and I will concede that probably every sin has a facet of it is idolatry, because you're not obeying the creator because you want something else. And so now you're worshiping something else rather. I get that. But first and foremost, sin is rebellion against a holy God. Sin gets the wrath. It's not simply not God's best for you, and it's not simply idolatry. And so those are some theological issues I have with it.
Yeah, and I think that what can happen is that you can be very attracted by the winsomeness of that situation. But then when you really start getting into the core teachings of what Christianity is about, it can feel a bit like a bait and switch, where you're coming into it and, oh wait, this goes beyond just homosexuality not being God's best for me. Like, we're talking about the fundamental human condition here of
Yes,
the
yes.
sin nature and the depths of our self-deceit and all of that. And I think that with Keller, he had this air about him of, in an age where, all the well-spoken people were the people in the public spaces and out in the secular world, he could compete with that. He was so well-spoken and so well-read, and he does have his apologists. I mean, they'll come on my page. I don't post about Keller because people have strong feelings to defend him. But I think that your point is well taken, that his followers don't have this. I'm going to say this in my words. His followers don't have the same suite of skills that he had to balance all of these things. And I feel like they're trying to mimic what they see in his book, Center Church, but they're not doing it as good. It's not a formula. Like the secret sauce of Tim Keller was Tim Keller. And you can't just repackage it as 5 principles of church planting and get the same results. I don't know. For me, that's
Yeah.
kind of
No,
some of my wrestle with it.
yes, yes. You're exactly right. But you're right. He was such an intellectual. He could compete with, or not compete with, but sit with and converse with anybody. And he did have this humility about him. I mean, sometimes it was almost it could be a feigned humility, but there was a humility about him that would say, like, I'm not an expert in these things. You're the he was very deferential. I love what Googly Eyed Gospel is saying, kind of like the seeker friendly movement, because that's a point I've made in the past too. So the seeker friendly movement was typically that would really upset missional people and Kellerites, honestly, because they've done everything in trying to be erudite and intellectual and intelligent to distance themselves from, what they view as unsophisticated, broad evangelicalism. But the seeker friendly movement would do things to attract people in church, like, I don't know, have blow up giant mascots there. And I mean, some churches were giving out beer after, I don't know, all kinds of weird things. And we'd say, well, like they would want to distance themselves from that. But there is a sense that that's what they're doing, but they're doing it in a sophisticated way. And, the big thing that I think is Aaron Renn. You familiar with Aaron Renn? And
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. So go ahead and bring that up, because
well, you got.
Yeah. Well, I think that Keller's approach, I think you described it so perfectly a few minutes ago, of like, there's this, you're trying to win an audience with another person, with the unbeliever. And so you're kind of acting and talking in such a way that is inviting to them. And then when you're on the spot, the ideal is that you're going to be forthcoming, in what Christianity is about, but you're going to do it in this careful, nuanced, winsome way. I think that approach, and I would say this could get me in trouble. I would say that my former employer was very much had that similar ethos, and that was how we were expected to act and behave in public. And the that strategy can work okay in the neutral world, which is when Keller was mostly thriving. And Aaron Renn has this concept called the negative world. And so he would say that, from a certain time period, we were living in the positive world, where generally the culture was reinforcing broad Christian values. And then in the 90s and early 2000s, it began to shift to the neutral world, where the culture wasn't against us, but they weren't exactly promoting Christianity in the public square. And I think that Tim Keller's model might work in the neutral world. But we don't live in the neutral world anymore. As of 2015, we live in what Renn calls the negative world. Since the Supreme Court installed and redefined marriage, our culture has become actively hostile to our worldview. Now, we could talk about the Trump vibe shift and everything, but I just heard Aaron Renn talk about that last weekend.
I was just going to ask you about that. I wonder if things are like, if there's been a pause on the negative.
Yeah, he did talk about that. I was at an in-person presentation with him last week, and he did bring it up, and he said, things are becoming more complicated. We're going to see what the long-term impact of this is. He's kind of in a wait and see mode. But I think that the issue with Keller's approach is I don't think it works in the negative world. And Kim says on here, so many pastors today sound like they're testifying before Congress. And I know Kim, and I'm interpreting that to mean what she's saying is they lack transparency. You kind of feel like they're not telling you the whole truth. And I think that people today, Christians who live in the negative world, we want to know the truth. We want transparency. We want people to be upfront. And earlier you mentioned Kristen Powers and the piece, I think she published in Christianity Today or something, of her complicated relationship with Keller. And Keller was how she came to faith. But then the deeper she got into the faith, she realized like, oh, wait, it's not what I thought it was. It actually excludes homosexuals. And that was very disenfranchising for her. And I'm a skeptic that kind of this, nice neutral world approach that can fly. I think people want transparency. They want you to tell them, what is this about?
No,
Where
you're
do
right.
you stand?
Yeah, I mean, coming into this, I was going to say the same thing. I think the project has failed. I think it's proven to have failed. So, Kirsten Powers was hailed as, because she had an earlier, is it Kristen or Kirsten?
Kirsten.
Yeah, she had like when she originally was going to Keller's church, and supposedly had converted from whatever she was.
She was an atheist.
Now she's a Catholic, I think. Like Christianity Today hailed this as the big success of Keller's ideology because, she's a Democrat or liberal political commentator who was reached with conservative Christianity, conservative theological, theology. So, that's some of what's, you might have heard the phrase, punch right and coddle left. And you ask, what are some of the issues with, well, that's what a lot of us feel is it's like this movement, in order to win a hearing with more progressive influences in society, a lot of these guys will punch right, meaning they're beating up conservatives, whether it be, Christians themselves or political conservatives. Either way, it accomplishes what they want. It's trying to show people on the left that they're their allies, but they're doing it at the expense of, like, sometimes truth, whether it be in politics or just the bride of Christ. Like, Christ doesn't want his bride being a punching bag. to win people to him. That's not what he wants. I mean, of course we're supposed to repent and seek forgiveness and be deferential and be and have humility, but Christ died for his bride. We're the bride of Christ. He doesn't want us beat up. And so Christians are constantly, and that's what you see in Christianity Today, and that's what you see in other supposed publications. It's just a never-ending, nonstop berating of Christians in this country to hope to win a hearing with non-Christians who are typically more progressive. And the fact of the matter is it's not working.
Yeah.
And Powers said she felt like it was a bait and switch.
Yeah. So as we wrap up here, we can't talk about Keller, not talk about third way-ism. And, his kind of third way approach. And this is how this shows up, at least how I see it is, well, Jesus wasn't a Democrat. Jesus isn't a Republican. There's a third way. And that's where Christians should be. We should be in the third way. And it kind of sounds like often when I hear that, what's meant is that there's like this middle of, well, the Republicans are partly true, Democrats are partly true, and we just need to pick and choose where where each one is true. Here's my problem with the whole third wayism kind of a thing is I feel like the biblical position is to the right of Republicans.
So there is yeah.
If we're going to talk about a third way, it's not in the middle. I've read through the whole Democratic platform from the election last year. I'm not finding anything that I like, yeah, this is solid. This is what Christians should hook their train to and get behind on this thing. Now, somebody can write to me and they can show me the line item in on the platform where I'm wrong, but I don't see the biblical worldview as manifesting in the Democratic platform. My third way is I'm to the right of where the Republicans are now based on their platform from last year. And so if that's what we're talking about in third way, okay, but I don't think that's how Keller meant it.
No. So here's the secret about the third way. The third way, I first encountered it in a book. I think it's Paulison's book from like the 90s. It wasn't from Keller.
David Paulison?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Keller initially was using third way, and it's a way to talk about the gospel itself, to say it's not legalism and it's not antinomianism.
Okay.
The gospel is a different, it's not even on a spectrum midway between legalism and antinomianism. It's its own thing. And so, it's like we often want to say, well, there's black and there's white, and people think the third way must mean gray. And it's no, there's black and there's white and then there's red. It's not okay. On the spectrum. So, and with legalism, so the law is everything and an end to itself. And then antinomianism, the law doesn't matter. No, the gospel, that's a misunderstanding of the law, and it's divorcing the law from the character of God. And the gospel is a third way. It's not through greater obedience or, so Keller takes that and he applies it to everything. And that's not the way this works in the world. And so what typically it's to make like moral equivalency, or it gives the impression of moral equivalency. And so like one of the examples, would be like, well, the left cares about the poor and the right cares about the unborn. And first of all, that's a false dichotomy. It's a false dilemma. And you're not even talking about the same thing, because it's not. I think you could have a debate about who cares about the poor more, the left or the right. I think there's different policies on how to deal.
They care about the poor differently.
Right. So it's not that one group is pro-poor and one group is anti-poor. There's a different philosophy of how to legislate to help the poor, whereas abortion is murder, and we're against it. So you don't create a moral equivalency between the political abortion position and the political care for, the vulnerable position. And so that's the problem. But what it does is it makes everybody, in a sense, it's trying to make people who hold unbiblical positions feel like they're not so bad because the other guys are wrong too. And we're all wrong.
But that's where the conversation goes, is when the third way is applied to political issues. That's exactly how the narrative goes, is, well, Democrats care for the poor and Republicans care for the unborn. And, they're both wrong on other things. And I'm thinking, like, yeah, they're both wrong, but I'm not even for how Democrats want to care for the poor. I'm not signing up for that. And I don't think that way is biblical.
And that doesn't mean that you don't love the poor.
I co-founded a justice ministry.
Hello, exactly.
No.
So that's why it's a false dichotomy, but it sounds, it sounds good. But the third way is a disaster. It's not like, well, okay, there's this problem on this side. Let's find a problem on the other side and just create a moral equivalency between them so that people don't actually feel bad about. No. Sometimes one side is actually right.
Yeah.
On an issue.
But that's going back to the issue of transparency before, is it, when people are not transparent about where they stand on certain public issues, I start getting very suspicious that they're probably progressive. And when they want to engage in these moral equivalency kind of things, antics is what Monique calls them, then, it's very suspicious to me of, that this third wayism sort of in the middle, and Democrats are right some of the times and Republicans are right some of the times. I'm like, that's just not how I see it. But, and we can have differences about policies and we can talk about all of that. But third wayism, when it comes to Christians in politics, to me is just a bankrupt way of trying to have the conversation.
Yeah. I don't know how long we're going to be on, if you need to go, but there's a tweet that I wanted to read.
Sure, go ahead. We can wrap up with that.
Okay. So this was one I screenshotted it and kept it because this is a typical sort of tweet that would infuriate me. So Keller says, and by the way, Keller, the last few years of his life, it was his son tweeting for him, and it would say that it was son Michael. So who knows if this was even Keller, but he says, Jesus' teaching consistently attracted the irreligious while offending the Bible-believing religious people of his day. However, our churches do not have the same effect, which here's where it is, which can only mean one thing. Our preaching and practice are not declaring the same message that Jesus did. So did you hear the connections there? So Jesus' teaching attracted the irreligious or the sinners and repulsed the religious, so the Pharisees. But our message is not doing that, which can only mean that we're not preaching the same message as him. And I was just like, that's not true. I mean, like, what about John 6, where he's attracting, I mean, the whole point of like the miracles is people are coming for the miracles, but they're not coming for the message. And so the evidence of that is they're coming. He says, you're not coming because, you understand what's going on here. You're coming so I feed you again. And then he says, you must, eat my body and drink my blood. And they leave and they're repulsed.
Right.
So this idea that, that just the masses were so enriched with Jesus' message, that's not true at all.
Yeah.
They were attracted by the miracles, and he showed people compassion and there was intrigue around it, but they all these people that saw these miracles all abandoned him at the end. So it's just, but that's again, trying to like strike at Christians. Like, you guys aren't preaching the right message because you're not attracting sinners into your church. Jesus says they hated me, they're going to hate you, Yeah. So, but that's another kind of a typical thing that he would do, that like people would champion. Yes, that's so right. I'm like, what's right about that? It could be right, but it's not necessarily right. And it certainly cannot only mean one thing. I mean, so. Anyway.
Yeah. The attractional model, when living in the negative world, I'm a skeptic that's gonna do much. So, well, thanks, George, for doing this with me. I appreciate it. It's been a great conversation. Yeah, and I want to thank everyone for being here, and we look forward to your comments and feedback. I will turn the comments on. So if you have something thoughtful to add, feel free to do that there. If you want to come crazy, just keep scrolling. But I would look forward to your comments on these interesting topics related to Andrew Tate and Tim Keller. And I think Monique will be back next week for the family meeting. So you can tune in then at the regular time.